Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I am Adrian Fort, and we are here for the first in a 13-part series as we journey chapter by chapter through, and then finally a review over Under the Volcano by Malcolm Lowry. So what happens here in chapter 1? It is the Day of the Dead, 1939, and we meet Jacques Lowry and Dr. Vigil. Vigil or Virgil? Did I write that wrong? It doesn't really matter. That'd be a silly thing to stop the video to go and check. But I could have sworn it was Virgil. It doesn't matter because he doesn't stick around too long in this chapter. By the next chapter, I will have it. No, it's Vigil. I'll be damned. Speaking of mispronunciations, that will become a common thread throughout this series. I am absolutely goddamn sure. But we meet Jacques Lowry and Dr. Vigil as they remember back on a fella named Jeffrey, whom they had both known. And while the doctor seems keen on relating his own ailments to Jeffrey's, who had passed, Lowry, well, he focuses on a different part of the story that had happened the prior year, using the Day of the Dead sort of as a marker. He focuses on the part with Yvonne and how he figured he would put her in movies. He does, in fact, want to make movies, and he is very well versed in literature. But his interest in Yvonne is much more carnal than that. Basically, that is what happened here in the first chapter. This is written, I'm going to mention a lot of literature too in reference to this literature, but it is written a lot like William Faulkner in the fact that what is happening in the story is not about what's going on action-wise. So Hemingway has that quote, "Do not confuse movement for action." There's a whole lot of movement in this chapter. There's no action presently at all. Much like with William Faulkner, you might have two characters on screen, but what's really going on is the threads from those characters mentally. So, for example, in As I Lay Dying, you have Darrell and Jewel approaching the homestead at the beginning of the novel, and Darrell is observing Jewel and figuring out where he's been. That's a lot like this chapter, but it's not about anyone else. It's Lowry thinking about himself. It's a whole lot of introspection, and we're going to get back to that. The first thing that I would like to talk about is, holy hell, the vocabulary on this guy. We have around 41 pages of writing as we start, I believe, on page 3 with the first page of the novel. What is the unique word count in this novel? If anyone has access to that information, I would love to know, because the vocabulary here smacks you in the face. There's one of the things for which Shakespeare is known as having one of the greatest vocabularies in all of English literature. But that vocabulary spanned across it. First off, it involved words that he made up, but it also spanned across many works. I can't say that I think I have ever had that feeling this early in a novel that, wow, this guy Malcolm Lowry is using a lot of words. Now, I know that sounds elementary, but pay attention. Pay attention to the unique word count in this novel, because what it does, if it persists in that way, what it does is that it refuses to paint a by using every word there ever was, you refuse to set a mood or a tone by the word choice. You're having to do that with other things which Lowry does as early as the title itself, Under the Volcano. Obviously, there is symbolism right off the bat, but there's also danger. And here we have the very first sentence of the novel. Two mountain chains traverse the Republic roughly from north to south, forming between them a number of valleys and plateaus. It sets the beauty of mountains. But what is a volcano if not a deadly mountain? So we have beauty, which is itself deadly. I'm willing to bet that's going to come back around. But we also have Under the Volcano. This can be taken two ways. Under the volcano, as in literally where the magma lies, turn your head and cough, right? Where the magma lies is under the volcano, but also under the volcano as in the shadow of the volcano. We all know the dangers that lie with living inside the blast radius of a volcano. But what you're doing with that, especially as a title, is you're setting up immediately tension. We have tension immediately, right off the bat, because we have the specter of volcanoes. Moving on from that, just in the very language involved in the town itself, Quauhnahuac. Quauhnahuac? Quauhnahuac. The small town in Mexico is the home to many casinos, to many hotels, including the Casino de la Selva, which means from the jungle. Now, we have here on that first page, from the jungle. The jungle is mysterious. The jungle is not civilization. The jungle is dark and carnal. It is not home. The jungle, like in much American and British literature, is the woods. The woods are the place of mystery. The woods are the place of death. The woods are the place where no good things roam. So that casino, from the jungle, is where the carnal desires persist. What we have here on, in the second paragraph here, let me see where my notes were. We have here 18 churches in this little town, 18 churches and 57 cantinas. That's over 3 times as many bars as there are churches. It's quite a few churches, but a whole lot of bars. And that should tell you something about the town itself. But slightly before that sentence, we have this sentence. A fine American-style highway leads from the north, but is lost in its narrow streets, and comes out a goat track. This is a statement on how you enter Quauhnahuac and where you end up. Civilization has put you there. The civilized world has put you there, has brought you there. You were able to follow that path. But while you were there, boy, those side streets, they got kind of windy, didn't they? And you ended up on a goat track. Here we have Leroux, who entered with dreams of making movies. Dreams he still mentions but does not act upon. With dreams of making movies, big, fancy, Western-style, American-style movies. But those side streets, They wind, and sometimes you wind up sleeping with another man's wife. And then you're stuck where you're at. Because in the rain, that torrential downpour, when you're on a goat track, you're stuck. So that seems to be a little bit of the symbolism that we're going for here. How do you enter and where do you end up? How vigilant have you been? Did you give in to the From the Jungle Casino? A little while after that, on page 5, we get this quote. One would have thought the horrors of the present would have swallowed it up like a drop of water. It was not so. Though tragedy was in the process of becoming unreal and meaningless, it seemed one was still permitted to remember the days when an individual life held some value and was not a mere misprint in a communique. One would have thought the horrors of the present would have swallowed it up. One would have thought that great big American highway would have turned into something else. Becoming unreal and meaningless, it seemed one was still permitted those winding roads. To remember the days when an individual life held some value and was not a mere misprint in communique. How do you enter and where do you end up? It seems to be a statement on the entropy of all those things civilized. A statement on how much effort it takes to keep things vigilant. We even have Leroux's very state of physique being commented on. He says he's getting too fat, and then he says, no, I am too fat. He entered a younger man and has let his physique get away from him and get stuck on those goat tracks. We understand later that Leroux has with him a bastard book of Elizabethan plays. Now, maybe it's just a book of plays someone let him borrow because, well, he wanted to make movies and he was the literature guy. But why were they Elizabethan plays? Elizabethan literature is known for internal conflict. Hamlet, anyone? It is known for spooky stuff, ghosts and the supernatural. And it is known for a protagonist with whom the audience will empathize. We seem to have all of those things here. After all, what would be... This is a clever little trick. Where does Leroux exist? He exists in a book. So if you know Leroux, you must be a reader. What is one way we might gain empathy from our readers, letting us know that the protagonist here, that main character that we follow throughout, well, he's a reader too. What a sneaky little trick, Mr. Lowry. He's a reader too. Not only that, he is himself empathetic to other people. But he's also faulty on his own. He has screwed up, and he knows it. But he seems to be. I don't think we quite get proof here. Perhaps he's just in lust. But we seem to be being led down the road that he is in fact in love with Yvonne. He certainly wants her company. He certainly wants communication with her. But I think we're being led to believe that he is in fact in love with her, and that is something with which surely most people can empathize. It gives you a reason to root for him. And I think another way that we can very easily connect with Lowry is that he is watching the sun go down on his hopes and dreams. And I think many people can empathize with that. I think many people, if not, so anyone who has succeeded their dreams, they definitely feared that being themselves. Anyone who is in the process of trying to live out their dreams, they definitely know that feeling. And anyone who has given up on their dreams surely had at one time known the feeling of watching everything go to hell and deciding for yourself, well, there's this sticky little time period in which I still talked about my dreams, but I did not act toward them. And that seems to be where Lowry finds himself. He still talks about his dreams, he still references literature, but he does not act as a movie maker. We never see a script. We never see him sizing any shots up. We never see him saying, well, that would make a good story. We never see him, we just see him playing with the literature that he knows, employing the work that lives inside his head, someone else's work that lives inside his head. The one thing that is, I can't let go from my own education is that this book would be extremely ripe for a post-colonial reading. Lowry is there from civilization. He's out in the wilderness, the jungle, with the jungle people, right? That is how he's sort of characterizing it, but there are those jungle people with whom he can interact in a civilized manner. But he still seems to look down on everything, to the very point where he is collecting idols from the Mexican people. You don't collect something that you worship. You worship it. But he collects idols in this town, which is almost like him saying these cute little jungle folk and their ideas of this religion. It's interesting for me to have these knickknacks. It comes across as very condescending. But he also, like I said earlier, he's fat. He says so himself. So, and he mentions how skinny some of the town folk are. So he's come from civilization to this rinky-dink town that no one would know about if it weren't for that big American-style highway right next to it. And I'm sort of playing the small town thing up. It's obviously not a small town. It has 18 churches and, 57 bars? But we get the feeling that those are places of employment, not places where the town folk are necessarily, like the casinos. Are they there for travelers? Are they there for spectators? Or are they there for the town folk? It seems very facade. It seems as if it is put up to sort of be a money trap, right? He mentions that he himself is fat. He's the fat Westerner. He's the fat person from civilization that has come there to drain the brown folk of all that is theirs, right? So this is sort of ripe for a post-colonial type of reading. But I promise I'm not really going to get too much into that during this series. It's not really. I like to sort of put shades of these things on these videos from time to time, just because I think that one of the things I try to do in these read-alongs is present the things that are fun to do, and I think that thinking of literature in those interpretive ways is fun from time to time. But I don't think that it's a judgment on the literature or the theories themselves. On 32, we get this quote. Being a coward and afraid for one's life were two different things. Now, he mentions here, being a coward and afraid for one's life were two different things in Mexico, which again is sort of lends itself to a post-colonial reading. After all, you wouldn't have to feel that way in a civilized place, would you? But that small text, being a coward and afraid for one's life were different things. What a hell of a quote. That's one that's probably almost definitely going to find its way into the review. But I think it deserves some further examination. Being a coward and afraid for one's life were two different things. What does that tell us about Lowry? It tells us that he is probably, at least on some level, a romantic. Knowing that there is a time and a place where you should stand up for yourself, even if it's dangerous, where you should stand up for someone you love, something you believe in, even if it's dangerous. But there's a difference between standing up for oneself in the face of danger and something being just indiscriminately dangerous. When something is indiscriminately dangerous, a situation or an act of nature or a war itself, when something is indiscriminately dangerous, it's probably best just to go ahead and be scared. Being scared leads you to react in the way that is natural. You evacuate your bowels and run. But I think that there is weight to that quote. Next, we have him talking about war and a submarine named the Samaritan and the German officers who were burned alive therein. Do you know where Samaritan comes from? Samaria or Samarita was a group of people with whom the early Jews did not get along. So there's a story in the Bible. Jesus, having been Jewish, told this story of a traveler who was he'd seen better days. He was worn down and torn apart by the road he was traveling, and a Jewish priest walked past him, pretended he wasn't there. And someone else walked past him. I can't remember who the someone else was. Pretended he wasn't there. But the Samaritan walked past, just a regular Samaritan, with whom the Jewish people did not get along. So Jesus, telling this story, should have painted the Samaritan in a poor light. But he said that who stopped to help the traveler begging along the road was the Samaritan. The Samaritan was a true neighbor. That is where the word Samaritan comes from. It is a story about not hating someone just to hate them, right? That everyone can have good qualities. That even our enemies might be the generous one. Instead, we have the opposite on display. The seemingly storied treachery of the Germans was combated by one of the good guys doing something very, very bad. So there's that. But I think we're going to probably have more of the Bible to deal with going forward in this text. So it's always a good idea to keep your eye open for references to the Bible, because they're going to tell you something about what's going on. The last thing, a couple more small notes here. It's impressive that we have English, Spanish, and I think French going on here, right? I think we have French going on here. But one of the things that makes this feel like, this first chapter feels like Ernest Hemingway wrote The Shining. That's how it feels. I doubt very much that it's going to stay that way. I don't think that if the Elizabethan plays have any prevalence, it might continue to be that way. But so we have a visitor in a hotel / casino type place from where he does not come. He's there for work. But it is written, first off, on that very first page, a fine highway. How often did Hemingway use fine? But that's not what I really mean when I say it feels like Hemingway. It's about longing for love. This feels like The Shining and A Farewell to Arms had a love child. It romanticizes a different culture in the way that Hemingway often did. It romanticizes a culture foreign to the writer in the way that Hemingway often did. It's about longing for love, as Hemingway often did. It uses little spats of other languages, as Hemingway often did. There are probably 1,000 more things in here. I think the dialogue sort of reminds me of Hemingway. Not saying that he was influenced by Hemingway. I have no idea. This would have been written in the 40s. Hemingway would have been a big deal by then, but he would not have been... Well, they say that his star died a little bit in the decades after his death, in the way that many American authors do. So I don't know how big a star Hemingway would have been in this would have been 40, 41, 42. I know that he was a big deal in America, but I think Lowry is British. I'm not sure. But yeah, that is all I have for the first chapter in Under the Volcano by Malcolm Lowry. I hope to have you back next week for chapter 2 and so forth as we make our way through this novel.